Jordan Lambert is Colorado State University's Director of Agricultural Innovation and Partnerships. Jordan's mission is to bring together innovators from all across the foodiculture system, create nourished people and a healthy, abundant planet. Jordan grew up on a Colorado dairy farm and served as Senior Director of Innovation at Indigo Ag and Vice President of Business Development at Fifth Valley Agricultural Software. Jordan received her MBA from Harvard Business School. Jordan today will be talking about some of her experiences in the yellow brick road of Agtech capital. So take it away, Jordan.
Oh, that was awesome. Thanks, Norm. Can you all see my slides okay?
They say yes.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah. So Norm and John and Pat asked me a little bit to talk about the yellow brick road of Agtech capital. And I wanted to tell you a little bit why I thought that could be a good topic for you all. For me, agriculture is as important as all of the other utilities that we need to have a really wonderful life. And agriculture can't exist without our farmers and ranchers, but it also can't exist without the technologies that support the activities of those farmers and ranchers. So today I'd like to share with you a little bit about my experiences in building and scaling ag tech companies to serve our farmers and ranchers. You guys should know, I think, about the business models that these different ag tech companies have to employ in order to be able to serve you. Because I think if we know what it's like for every part of our agricultural ecosystem to succeed, it helps us interact with those companies better as farmers and ranchers. So that's a little bit why I wanted to tell you a little bit about this today. So I really care about agriculture. I've made my career in it because I believe that agriculture is infrastructure. Just as our roads and bridges and our energy grid need investment to maintain that infrastructure, so too does our agriculture. Innovation is particularly important in agriculture because things are changing all the time. We have more mouths to feed than we ever have, and that number is likely to go up for a little while before it goes down. Also, there's a lot of change around our consumer preferences. Consumers are getting more curious than they ever have been before about the ag supply chain and where their food comes from. And in addition to that, farmers are, of course, no stranger to changes from Mother Nature and also the markets. So to me, innovation is one of the things that's really important to maintain a healthy infrastructure that's embedded in a world that's full of change. So that's why I think agricultural investment in innovation is really important. I have found, in large part with my conversations with Pat Christie, that there are 4 ways to create the innovation tools that ag really needs to be successful. The first way, and it's often the way that often springs most to mind to a brand new, ag tech founder of today's day and age, and that's traditional venture capital, which is going to require a corporate or an IPO exit. So traditional venture capital is where you have a bunch of venture capitalists who have raised a fund. In many cases, they are on the coasts, so either like Boston, New York area, or in Silicon Valley. Increasingly, we're seeing more VC in the middle of the United States, which I think is a really positive development, because I think it's really difficult to put your money into a company that you don't understand if it's serving customers that you've never met. So I think it's really important that we are seeing more venture capital show up in the middle of the United States. However, the bulk of venture capital today really does come from the coasts. In the case of venture capital, what's important to a venture capitalist is that they make their money back as soon as possible, which means that they often require an exit. Either that's a corporation that's purchasing the startup company or actually being listed on the stock exchange for an initial public offering. So those are usually the 2 ways that a venture capitalist gets out of an investment. But beyond venture capital, because I think that's only one tool in our toolbox to help support these ag tech companies that need to support our farmers and ranchers, there's a couple of others. One then that I think is underutilized is adapting technology from other industries. So here you have a picture of car manufacturing robots. Just the other day, I was in a potato shed in San Luis Valley where they had adapted one of these car robots to actually pick up bags of potatoes, 50-pound bags of potatoes, and put them onto a pallet. So that's a good example of adapting technology from other industries. And that's important because some of these cutting edge technologies take a lot of time and a lot of money to develop. So if you can spread the cost of that technology development across many industries, ag included, some of those other industries can pay a lot of the bill around what it's going to take to invest in some of these technologies to get them to market. But ag doesn't have to be the only business model that can carry that product all the way forward. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. Another way that we can create innovation tools is when you have a visionary founder. I think Norm Mullins is one of those. Usually a subject matter expert who teaches themselves how to code, especially in the software space. And then a lot of the time they bootstrap by selling the software as a service or as a product to the customer market. But they have to be really miserly with their capital to make sure that they can stay afloat while they're trying to scale the business. And we're seeing actually in the ag space right now that there are a number of people who were very innovative early adopters. You think of software coding is really something that started in the 1980s. And so we're seeing a lot of the early innovators from that era who decided to teach themselves how to code while they knew something else. The man pictured here is a man named Steve Eicher. He was a veterinarian in the dairy industry who taught himself how to code, and he made a really powerful company out of that. I think, as I said, Norm is one of these people as well, somebody who had a subject matter expertise, taught themselves how to build software, and then bootstrapped from there. We have an entire generation of these people that are embedded in our ag infrastructure right now. And as they're nearing retirement, we need succession plans to support these people. The fourth way that innovation tools can be created for farmers and ranchers, I believe, is through an industry-funded model. And that's one of the reasons that I'm particularly interested in learning a little bit more about FBS and their relationship with MASA. I think that cooperatives have the opportunity to serve farmers and ranchers really, really well. And have done for many generations, but that model has not yet been applied to software. And I think what's really interesting about this moment in time is I think software is one of those technologies that has been democratized over the course of the last 50 years. The price of developing software in many ways has come down. There are more people who know how to do it, and there's more tools to make it more accessible and easier to do than ever before. And so I think it's time to be thinking about how farmers and ranchers can fund some of the tools themselves that they would like to see support their operations. So I'll kind of do a deeper dive into each of these four ways to create innovation ag tools here in the ag infrastructure so that we can think about the pros and cons of each, because I think as a consumer of these technologies, it's important to know what the motivations are of the money behind the company that's selling you something. So when we start talking about traditional VC to corporate IPO or exit, I think it's really important to note this. Ag venture capital investment globally, this is not just in the United States, this is globally, is frankly insufficient to meet our needs. Agriculture is a $1 trillion economy globally, and we're only investing $10.2 billion a year in farm tech, so pre-farm gate applied technologies globally in 2022. And by the way, 2022 was actually a bumper year. That was one of the biggest ones ever to date. In that same period, almost $500 billion was invested globally in renewable energy. And when I see figures like this, in some ways it makes me a bit sad, because I would say that food is just as important as our energy portfolio is. But I think it's also, in some ways, maybe a silver lining. There's reasons why venture capitalists often do not invest in ag tech companies. There's probably some good reasons that we kind of don't want them to in some cases, unless they're really committed to the ag cycles that are common in ag. So to show that a little bit in more detail, traditional venture capital is often at odds with ag tech. They're relying on a software model that's often misaligned for a number of different reasons. Every venture capital software investor that I have ever met is looking for the next PayPal or Amazon, right? In large part because software is a really great business that has really, again, only existed for about 50 years now. Software is special because you can build something once and then sell it a million times. And that's a really great business model, especially if your total addressable market is, in fact, millions of people. What's really cool about Amazon is like anybody with an internet connection and a credit card is a target customer. And there's literally millions of these in the United States, hundreds of millions in the United States, and billions globally. This is a little bit different in a highly consolidated industry like ag tech. In most cases, the end customer of an ag tech innovation is the decision maker on farm. So the farmer or the rancher who controls the farm. And as you know, even though there are 1 million, 2 million, depending on how you're counting, farmers in the United States, once you get into specific verticals, there's only thousands or tens of thousands of farmers in any specific vertical. You got your vineyard growers, you've got your dairy farmers, you've got your hog farmers, you've got your corn farmers and your soy farmers. And once you get into each of those niches, and often the technology will not translate from one to another. A cow collar for tracking how much she's moving and how much she's eating every day is likely not going to be super handy in the grape industry, for instance. So you have to be really highly targeted. And again, this is something that's like pretty misaligned with modern traditional venture capital. The total addressable markets are not the same. Another way in which ag tech is quite different from traditional VC is that a lot of times with traditional VC, they're expecting to see customers acquired on a daily or monthly basis, as often as possible. Whereas because in many cases in agriculture, we're growing a crop that takes an entire growing season to get through, and usually there's only one of those a year, you're starting to look at onboarding farmers more in an annual way than in a monthly way. If you're Amazon, they absolutely have targets for monthly onboarding of new customers, daily even, certainly not annually. They would consider that to be far too slow. And that's a little bit of a problem because most venture capitalists want to put their money into a company and get it out at a 5 to 10 times multiple within 5 to 7 years. And again, that's quite different than ag tech. Sometimes because you're picking up customers more on an annual basis than on a daily or a monthly basis, you're looking at 10 years until you can get to a place where a corporate would want to purchase them, or it would be appropriate to list these companies on a stock exchange. And sometimes it takes way longer than 10 years, sometimes many decades. And in other cases, maybe it's appropriate for that company to never exit. And that's just really fundamentally misaligned with how most venture capitalists think about their portfolios. Another way in which they're pretty different comes back to a point I made earlier, which is that you're often expecting in a traditional VC capacity that if you make a great tool like Amazon or PayPal, it's something that can be applied in many sectors. So as much as consumers are using Amazon, manufacturers also use Amazon in some cases to purchase products. So you're going to business as well as to consumers. You're also hoping that it's going to work across geographies. So Amazon is very active in the EU as much as it's active in the United States. But sometimes with ag tech, it's not appropriate to have a piece of software work in one context and expect it to work somewhere else. In some cases, that works out okay. In the beef space, for instance, there's a couple of softwares that are coming out of New Zealand that are helping to map grazing lands, and that seems to work pretty well in a lot of the United States. But there are other technologies, like specifically for sheep ranching, that work really great in New Zealand, where they have really big paddocks, but that's actually not very normal here in the United States. So you're not going to see that applicability across geographies in the same way that a traditional venture capitalist would want to see. And then the final big difference between traditional VC and software in the ag tech space is really return expectations. A lot of those traditional VCs are really looking for an IPO pop of 5 to 10x the amount of money that they put into the business. They're also expecting for that money to just keep coming, especially if they're pre-exits. They're really looking for that revenue to be high and consistent and continual. In ag tech, however, it's quite a cyclical industry, in large part because the underlying dynamics of the agriculture industry are quite cyclical. So those are all ways in which traditional VC is a bit misaligned with ag tech. So I'm really interested in seeing if we can explore some different models for funding these companies that are a really important part of our agricultural infrastructure. I'll tell you a little bit of a story about Indigo. So I did work for Indigo. Show of hands, how many of you know what Indigo is? Yeah, there's a few people there. Yeah, okay. Okay. So you might well ask, what is Indigo Agriculture? My job at Indigo actually was to write as many business plans as the CEO wanted. So when I left, there were about 6 business plans that Indigo was pursuing. One was around the microbiome, and it was a microbiome application that helped corn, cotton, wheat, soy, and rice plants grow better, more nitrogen use efficient, more water use efficient. That was one business model. Another business model that you might be more familiar with is actually their carbon credit trading program, where they were paying farmers to incorporate no-till or cover cropping, and often their microbiome as well, to increase soil carbon sequestration. They also have business models around transporting grain of an identity preserved kind. So grain that has been grown in a very particular way for a particular buyer. And they also had a marketplace that they were using to help buyers and farmers transact with each other around identity preserved corn, cotton, wheat, soy, and rice. So as you can see, Indigo had quite a lot of different business models. But I think it's an interesting case study for this venture capital illustration specifically. I loved working at Indigo because it was an intoxicating environment, really smart people working on some really tough problems. However, one of the problems that I had with Indigo, it actually eventually led to me leaving Indigo in large part, was I felt that the venture capitalists who had invested in Indigo expected different things than Indigo would ever feasibly be able to deliver. Indigo comes from a venture capitalist shop called Flagship Pioneering that's based in Boston. Flagship Pioneering is a group of venture capitalists that build blockbuster businesses for a living. And up until that point of creating Indigo, actually, all of the investors had been biotech investors. And Flagship had frankly been really successful in the biotech space. They created a little company called Moderna. You might have heard of it. So a lot of the venture capitalists who invested in Moderna, when Indigo came along in 2018 and was looking to raise a $650 million round, which was a round that I was part of, they were all too happy to give their money into Indigo, thinking that a lot of the characteristics that I talked to you about on the prior slide, that they had become accustomed to in the biotech space around Moderna, were appropriate for Indigo. The story went something like this. Moderna is a company that's building mRNA vaccines so that all humans can be protected from viruses that are emergent. A similar pitch was given about Indigo. All humans eat. Think about, as an investor, how big of a prize you might be able to have financially if you were able to get a piece of the action of all of the food that all of us eat. You and I know that those are sort of very different parts of the market, but it felt like a similar story to the venture capitalists who are in the audience. When I left Indigo in 2019, it was valued at $3.2 billion. over the course of this last summer, they took a down round and are now valued at $200 million. So that's quite a decline in the value of the stock. And they're still pre-IPO, by the way. That's venture capitalist stock. I say that to say not that that can happen for a variety of reasons and happens to many companies that are outside of the ag industry. But I think for me, one of the major reasons that this did happen is that investor expectations were quite a bit different than what the underlying business model of the company could actually provide. So that's an illustrative example. I think another way that we can create innovation tools that agriculture needs is actually adapting technology from other industries. I gave you the example of the potato packer earlier, but another example that I want to share with you is a company called NeedApp. You've probably never heard of NeedApp, but their technology is the traceability technology for all of Under Armour, as well as Lululemon and a bunch of other clothing retailers. They are also the ones who power all of the locks in the Eiffel Tower, if you've ever been there. And if you've ever been to a parking garage where they have the cute little lights that are different colors above each of the parking spaces, so you can tell which parking spaces are free and which ones aren't, NeedApp makes all of that hardware as well. And a lot of the hardware that they've made for these very different industry verticals actually turned out to be quite valuable in the dairy industry. One of the very best activity and rumination collars in the dairy industry is done by NeedApp. But NeedApp doesn't actually go direct to a farmer to sell them that collar. They do it as a white label through various partners. In most cases in the dairy space, they're white labeling onto semen brands. So some of the very best dairy genetics companies all have a white labeled NeedApp collar. So they're all using the same technology, but it is the genetics company that's actually walking that technology onto the farm. But if you're going to do this, if you're going to adapt technology from the Eiffel Tower and from Under Armour into an activity and rumination collar for the dairy space, you need to have committed leadership, both on the part of NeedApp as a company and on the farm. I think one of the reasons that NeedApp has been so successful is that there were many farmers who were really willing to engage with NeedApp to tell them exactly what was valuable to them. And for NeedApp's part, they were really good at having an innovation team embedded in the organization whose job it was to go discover what those pain points were for those farmers that an activity and rumination collar could actually solve. So you really have to have committed leadership, both on the big company side, but also this really fluid dialogue between the company and the farmer as well, to make sure that they're building something that's actually truly valuable for the producer, so that the producer's willingness to pay is high enough to warrant being in that business for the company like NeedApp. Another example that we talked about a little bit earlier is entrepreneurs who bootstrap. So as I said, Norm is one of these people, but so is this fella. His name is Steve Eicher. So Steve Eicher was a veterinarian who taught himself how to code in Tulare, California in the 1990s. And what you're seeing on the right is kind of a schematic of some of the things that Dairy Comp is able to do. So there's transponders around the necks of every single one of those cows, and you can use an RFID wand that's attached to a mobile phone to bloop each cow into the system and then put their data into a medical record system, much like ones that are in the hog industry. And I think what was really brilliant about what Steve Eicher was really able to do, because he was a veterinarian, he understood the trusted relationship between the veterinarian and the dairy producer. And so he targeted his company as much for the veterinarian being able to provide better data-driven advice to the producer as he did to the farmer himself. So here you have this person who's really special. I would say that he's able to do three things really, really well. And every ag tech entrepreneur who needs to bootstrap needs to be able to do these three things. The first thing that Steve was able to do is really understand the problem that he was solving for his customers. So he understood what kinds of KPIs a dairy farmer cared about and their veterinarian cared about. So he understood the ag problem really deeply. He also had deep technical expertise, in his case in veterinary medicine, but he also built a set of technical expertise on the engineering side. But the third thing that he had to learn how to do that almost makes him a unicorn is really managing the business well. I find in my role as the director of Ag Innovation, that it's pretty easy to find an entrepreneur with any two of those three, but it's really difficult to get three of three. So you almost certainly have to have systems in place to train that third piece, whatever it is. You might have an entrepreneur who's really good at technical expertise and really understands the business, but maybe they don't understand the ag problem. And that's part of what we do at the Ag Innovation Center at Colorado State University, is help people that have the time and the talent really become familiar with real ag problems that are worth solving. When we talk about VAS, though, I think it's really important to be thinking about these bootstrapping entrepreneurs needing succession plans. So recently, Steve Eicher did retire, and the way that the company handled that transfer, so this was also a company that I worked for, a company called the Uris Group, so a family office, purchased Valley Ag Software. My hope is that that goes very well, but I will say that for the first several years that I was working there after that acquisition, it was pretty tough because actually the company that purchased this company had traditionally been in the animal genetics space. So they really understood how to build barns and buy bulls and freeze the sperm and put it into straws and get it back out onto farm. That's what they understood how to do. They didn't understand software, which meant that their investor expectations were also in some ways pretty misaligned with what the dairy farmer really needed. I think they're probably back on their feet a little bit now. They have invested in an executive who understands software and understands ag problems. But it's really important that the investor behind any company that is trying to make a difference in ag tech is actually one that understands both the business of farming and the business of the technology that they happen to be in. So then that brings us sort of to the fourth way that we can create innovation tools that agriculture really needs. And that's the one that I think MASA is really looking at doing right now. So really looking at an industry funded model. So how can farmers and ranchers put their buying power together to direct the agricultural innovation that they require, that they see as important for their enterprises going forward? And I've been talking a lot with Pat Christie about, a few no regrets best practices that are probably going to be quite important for any group of people who want to self-fund their own ag tech innovations. And I think it really comes down to these three things: being able to say what you need very clearly. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Supporting the prioritizer. When you are developing software, you have to take in needs from all of the different people who are trying to use your thingamabob. And then you have to prioritize those things because you can't make all of those thingamabobs true all at once. You only have so many developers, resources are limited. So it's actually a really tough job to be the person who collects all of the needs, tries to understand how difficult it is to make any of those things come into reality, and then actually choose which things need to go first on the basis of that. And then the final thing is one that came out of a conversation with John McNutt a few days ago, which is this idea of creating a barn building culture. So agriculture has a really proud history of coming together as a community to build the things that we need together. And nurturing that kind of a community is really what's going to be important, I think, in making sure that we're building things like software specifically. In the case of putting up a barn, you put up the barn over the course of one or a few days, and then it's kind of there until you've decided to depreciate the asset all the way to the ground, or you decide to tear it down and put up something else. You don't have to do too much to it in terms of maintenance. Software is different because software is a living, breathing thing that is wonderful in its adaptability and its ability to support changes as the environment is changing around the tool. It can adapt when it's directed to do that, when you're trying to develop new pieces that make it more appropriate for the context that it finds itself in. But that also means that it can grow and change. So you have to have a culture of building that barn every single day. a couple of illustrative examples about this that I think might be handy. I really want to talk about the saying what you need piece first. I had cancer a number of years ago. Everything's fine now. But I had this particular moment where I had reached out to many of my friends and asked them to help me during this time of great trial in my life. So I asked them if they wouldn't mind, reaching out sometimes, making sure that I was well cared for. And boy, did they show up. It was super great. On a particular afternoon in the middle of June, I was standing on my back porch, actually waiting for a very good friend of mine to bring me the 11th lasagna that I had received that week. And I don't even like lasagna, but I had neglected to tell everyone in my community that one, I only had a freezer that could accommodate one lasagna. Two, I didn't even like lasagna. And three, that I had too many lasagnas already. So by just asking for help generally, and this happens a lot when we're developing software, actually. I've been in a lot of positions where I serve the role of the software product manager, and I'm asking the client, you guys in this case, what is it that you need? And they say, help in this particular direction. And unless I get more specificity than that, you might end up with quite a lot of lasagna. If that wasn't actually what you wanted, you should be more clear. So when I qualified for my friends that actually what would be really helpful to me is a lot of false flowers, because I was going to go into the ICU and I couldn't have fresh flowers there. I got all sorts of really wonderful dry flowers that everyone was really excited to give me. I felt very nurtured. They felt like they really helped, and they really did. And I didn't have to eat quite so much lasagna. So my point is, be specific about what you want to accomplish as you're interacting with any software product manager, whether that's in a VC-backed firm or whether that's in a firm where the entrepreneur is bootstrapping, or in a situation where you as farmers and ranchers are funding the building of a particular piece of software. Please, God, say what you want to accomplish in really concrete terms. And then after that, it's really important actually for you to be able to say how much you're willing to pay for that feature. One of the things that a software product manager has to be able to do is rank every need that somebody comes to them with in terms of what exactly it is, how valuable it is to the person, and then finally, how complicated it is to deliver that. So nothing comes for free. Every software feature that somebody is trying to build comes at the cost of a developer's time. So it's the software product manager's job to understand these needs, understand how valuable they are and how much it costs, so that they can rank order those features in terms of the best value for the greatest number of people along those three metrics. So I think these pieces are really important if you are going to be a part of an organization that's building something collectively. And another piece of this is really supporting that prioritizer, the product manager or the CEO in this case, who might be collecting those things on the prior slide. That's a really tough role to be in, because you're stuck between all of your clients, who all of which there are many, and they're all vociferous. They have needs right now that are very demanding. And on the other side, they're caught between our developers with the developers who are software developers who are only human and can only do so much in a given day. There's always more to be done than people there are to do it. And so it's really important to be able to support that prioritizer so that they can stay in the saddle all the way until all of the features are implemented for the product to be really useful to the farmer or the rancher. And then finally, as we discussed, really creating that barn building culture. Software is something that's living and breathing. It needs to be supported all the time, not just, the day that you're building it, then you get to set it and forget it. And I think part of that barn building culture is really great civil communication amongst the clients of the company, as well as, again, with that prioritizer and the dev team. When everybody has really urgent needs, it can be really challenging challenging to sort through everybody's in a patient and constructive way so that the barn actually gets built at the end of the day. But if those things are in place, I think it's really possible for a committed cooperative group to really come together and build something that is potent and necessary and helpful for our ag businesses of the present and the future. So with that, I will just say thank you and open it up in case you guys have any questions.
Questions? Yes, let me get this over here.
Russell Morgan. This question may not actually be pertinent to, well, it is pertinent to this group. However, in your presentation of the 4 different categories, the 4 different methodologies, I didn't hear incubators and accelerators. How do you see that fitting in with what you in your presentation?
Ooh, I think I followed everything except that very last question, which was where the crux of the question actually was. Norm, would you mind repeating it for me?
The question was with regard to accelerators and incubators like Ag Launch in Memphis and there are others across the country. How does that fit in with what you just presented?
Oh, super great question. My personal belief, and so I'm in conversations with Margaret Oldham at Ag Launch. You've also got Grand Farm up in the Midwest. There's the Wet Center that's out in California. So yeah, there are a number of incubators and accelerators now, which is actually, frankly, a pretty new phenomenon. Incubators and accelerators as a model have really only been around effectively for 10, 15 years. And frankly, I don't think that we have cracked the nut on what a really great incubator accelerator needs to look like for ag tech specifically. A lot of those incubators and accelerators generally, so outside of Ag Launch and Grand Farm, so Techstars and Plug and Play, are really focused on pillar number 1 that I showed you, the venture capitalist backed aspect of it. The original instantiation of accelerators and incubators, in fact, the big daddy of them all is called Y Combinator. It's in Silicon Valley. That's the original accelerator. And they have minted a lot of different companies that they're very proud of, PayPal being one of them. They got a really big payday out of that. Most of those incubators and accelerators make their money because venture capitalists are using the accelerator to get deal flow. Getting into those incubators and accelerators are not, they're sort of there for the entrepreneur to like learn and get better or whatever. But actually what they're there for is to the venture capitalists pay the people who run the incubators and accelerators to help those entrepreneurs get a pitch deck that's good enough for a venture capitalist to want to invest in them. And I think, unfortunately, this has actually happened and continued in a lot of those ag tech incubators and accelerators, not all of them. I think Ag Launch in particular has a very interesting model because it's typically the producer who takes a position on the equity table as opposed to a venture capitalist. Sometimes a venture capitalist also invests, which I think is a much more interesting model. But to my knowledge, there are no incubators and accelerators that help columns 3 and 4. So an entrepreneur, like if Norm Mullins was, deciding to start his business today as a young person, there's nobody there really to support somebody who wants to create a business that they will never exit, except to somebody who wants to perpetuate the company, as opposed to exiting for an IPO or a corporate acquisition. So it's actually one of the things that I'm really curious about is how might we help create an accelerator incubator model that is appropriate for some of these ag tech companies that want to build to continue instead of build to exit. That was a great question. Probably too long of an answer.
This is Dave Swain. kind of against your Indigo example, and you're talking about the more VCs coming from the Midwest rather than the coasts. Do you see them having a better handle on what the ebb and flow of agriculture is, and also in how the company itself is valuated? So that, you know, kind of the issue that I read about with Indigo was how it was evaluated, you know, 3 years ago versus this year changed, and why that was part of the reason for the drop.
Yes. Well, and sort of building on the previous point too. So am I seeing venture capitalists in the middle of the United States who are actually more in touch with agriculture? The answer is yes. One of the ones that I'm pretty impressed with is Grit Road Partners, which is out of UNL in Nebraska. Ben Williamson is doing a lot there, and I actually just had a conversation with him this past week where he was telling me that a number of his limited partners, so he runs a venture fund called Grit Road. It's dedicated to ag tech companies. Many of his limited partners who helped him build that fund said, hey, man, I wish you would raise $100 million fund. And Ben said, no, because I don't think you're going to find enough good deals at an appropriate valuation, to your point, in this space. You'll actually do more good for ag tech companies if it's more like a $20 to $30 million fund, so that we can write smaller check sizes and make sure that the valuations are like something that the underlying economics of agriculture can support, as opposed to the case of Indigo. Because you're quite right. They did change the way that they valued it, which happens frequently in younger companies. And Indigo is, in the grand scheme of things, a pretty young company. And we know that they had several business models that they were pursuing. So that's part of why that happened. But I think fundamentally, they were not paying attention to the ebbs and flows of the agricultural cycle. So I am seeing some more better VCs that are starting to think about this. I'm also really curious about hybrid VCs, more like an impact investor than a VC that's expecting a 10x return.
So Jordan, Randy Gangrish, this is back on the industry funded model.
Yeah.
What do you think the product committee looks like for MASA? What should it look like?
Oh, great question. And it's been so wonderful to be able to engage with Norm and John and Pat Christie around that. Pat, of course, is very seasoned in the software space. I think the product team for MASA, as I've seen some of the projections that Pat put together, he has a nice team of a couple of different developers and a few people who are subject matter experts on the software engineering part. I think the part that's going to be super critical, every team member in a small company is critical. I don't have to tell you guys that. You guys know that from your own farms. But I think the choice of the CEO is going to be particularly important in this particular case. That CEO, in my mind, and I have had really great discussions with John and Norm about this, I believe that CEO needs to be have pretty decent product management experience. They can probably learn accounting and they can probably learn problems facing you guys as clients. So that's, I think, where they're going to need some training. I think if you really invest in a product manager who is good at doing these three things, listening to you and hearing what you want to accomplish in concrete terms, helping you articulate how much you're willing to pay for that, and then finding out from their developers how complicated it is going to be to deliver that, and then tell the MASA membership, then the customers, what that roadmap needs to look like, and be in conversation with the board. I think you're going to have I think you guys are going to have to innovate around what board governance in this situation looks like, because basically the CEO is not, you guys are in the enviable position. I think it's a good position where the customer is the investor. Because much of the time in an ag tech space, I will say from the perspective of Indigo, I was in a lot of those conversations. The CEO at the time was not able to serve the customer because they were serving what the investor thought should happen, which in many cases was not aligned with what the farmer needed. So I think MASA is in a special position to be able to do that well, as long as you can find a CEO who's able to have this dialogue with the board, with the customers, and with their developer, and then have clear prioritization around that.
Hi, this is Joan Maxwell, an actual farmer, former business analyst. One of the things that I see can be a struggle is the complexity, and how do we keep a software simplified but still meet the needs of the complexity of the whole thing? Because the more complex we make it, the harder to get people to adopt it and put the time into it.
Yeah, balancing all of those things is like that's the job of the CEO, and it's really hard. And that's why I say I think this barn building culture, if you guys are committed to this MASA idea, and I, like, for whatever my opinion's worth, I think it's probably the most innovative thing to happen in software or in agriculture in many decades, to think about this as a cooperative model. But I think being able to work together as a group to come up with a product that is truly driving value for you guys is going to be the hard work. But if you can do that well, you're going to be in a really good position, and frankly unstoppable. Because I don't know if you guys, how many of you were in the room when Pat earlier was talking a little bit about what it looks like to make a minimum viable product. Software can so easily become a many-headed hydra, like an octopus, very quickly. So being like laser focused on the features that drive the most value for the membership, I think is really gonna be what serves you guys well. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I think that's the part that's important.
Any more?
Okay. So Jordan, this Randy again, just more follow up on this product committee idea. I mean, you kind of went down the road of the, should I say, product manager, who's responsible for all this, but how do the, is there owner committee structure? How would you design that?
Oh, yeah. So the best product managers that I know are ones that have a cadence, a process of staying in touch with probably a product council. So like not more than 5 or 7 people that they kind of report out to as a product board, right? People who are the people that you would want on that board are people who can do this really well. So if there are members among you who have strong preferences about where the value is in your business and you're able to articulate those well, that is the kind of person that you'd probably want on a product committee that CEO, product manager can have on speed dial. So they can call you guys at any time and say like, hey, I just got this request from a customer over here. Where do you think that should rank? So I think having that group of people is quite helpful. I believe that the product manager should also be interviewing lots of different clients outside of that board on a regular basis. A good product manager should be talking to customers at least once a day. They also need enough time to be talking to their developers as well. So the bulk of their time should probably be talking to the developer, but they should be talking to the customer base that they tend to serve regularly. So those are like 2 types of customers that the product manager should be engaging with. But I think there's also a set of meetings and probably a set of template slides of a product roadmap that the product owner, CEO should be presenting to both boards, the MASA board and the product board. first to the product board to get their sign off and support, and then to the MASA board to make sure that everybody's on the same page about what's going to get developed next. I mean, I think you've probably all had the experience of telling somebody on your enterprise, please go make this fence over there. And you come back a little while later and the fence is going north-south and you meant it to go east-west, or they poured too much concrete or something like that. So you're gonna want regular, deep engagement with that product board to ensure that everybody's on the same page about what that fence, that feature ought to look like, or you're gonna get a lot of lasagna. So I think it's a combination of the right people on the board, as well as the right cadence of interacting with those people.
That's Chance. Anyone else? Okay. Well, you got us fired up, Jordan. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate your time, everybody. And I think what you're doing is so cool. Thanks very much for having me.